Hey, good evening, everyone, or morning or afternoon, whatever time it is where you are. So, I have to apologize to everyone here. I am in a lot of pain, and I have been for the past late week into the weekend, and I am not feeling very well at all. But I'm going to try to be as present as possible. This is not the best presentation I'm going to give. Also, I don't like doing these narrative things. It's much easier when I have the face to face thing going on, but I'm going to try my best. So, tonight we're going to talk about a prevalent and controversial issue in America right now, which is the incarceration rate and the police to civilian homicide that plagues a great deal of the population. And we're going to examine some of the social theories that might play a role in this. So, here's the problem. The problem is that, as we've all seen on the news, um, cops are taking out their guns and shooting people and finding later on that they weren't actually armed at all in the first place. Many of these people tend to be in urban areas and of racial minorities, which plays upon issues that have plagued our country for a very long time. And this isn't the case in other countries. It has been interesting going to other countries and finding that you can't just, if you're a cop or even a soldier out on the road, you can't just take out your gun and shoot someone. Even in countries where you'd think, yeah, well, yeah, the ends justify, you know, the ends justify the means. Um, that's not necessarily the case in other countries. It just happens to be that way here, and a dangerous precedent has been set that allows cops to act this way. So here's some numbers. In 2016, police shot and killed 963 people, and up to 12,765 between the years 2008 and 2012. So we've got around 1,000 people a year being killed by cops. The rates of these were much higher for African Americans. There are some myths that I uncovered, not even having any bias in this regard. There are some myths that I uncovered doing my research, and we'll get into those. But it's not just homicide; it's also excessive force, and even 10% of the cases brought up against the police involve sexual assault. However, many of those were fabricated because of whatever reasons we don't know. But those are only from numbers of allegations made against cops. But this could be an issue. All right, so this is the part of the speech that has to be controversial. And I hate being this way for this issue because this is one that I really do believe in. I'm sure some people in this class think I'm a little bit contrarian, but believe it or not, I'm progressive on this issue, because this does involve liberty and individual rights. Um, but these are some statistics that I uncovered, and that is that this is not necessarily the race war that the narrative that we hear on the TV or in media corroborates. It's not like it's all white cops going out and just shooting black people. In fact, twice as many whites were killed than blacks were killed by cops. And also, black cops were 3.3 times as likely to shoot than white cops, which is another interesting thing that I learned. However, in spite of these things, it is more likely that unarmed black people are killed than unarmed white people, which is the root of the issue. And we'll get into that when we start discussing conflict theory and how it plays into this. Um, However, another point to bring up is that only 5% of police shootings actually occur under circumstances that one might say are dubious. And that means that many of these police shootings involve situations in which the officer's life was actually immediately in danger. So you can't really blame them for some of the violence. If someone, pull someone over and they pull out a gun, and if you shoot them, you're not going to be blamed for that if you're a police officer. That's self defense. If it's your life or theirs, 95% of those are justified and charges are not, usually pressed. But in 5% of those are the ones that, in which foul play is involved and are worth examining. So this has led to severe community and police officer distrust, which is the issue that we really need to rectify in this country. Um, you have two types of officers. I hate to put it this way, but we've got good cop, bad cop. You have cops who do not know how to do their job, who use their power as a power play, who do promulgate the violence that is an inherent part of this conflict theory that we're going to bring up a little bit later. But then you have the good cops, the ones who take the words protect and serve very seriously. And those are the ones that are now in danger as a ramification of some of the actions of the bad cops. And that's a pretty big deal. That's an issue because now what we're starting to see are something that we're also seeing in Europe, which are police no-go zones. In spite of the controversy surrounding their existence, there's been a great deal of evidence presented that, by cops, that, they don't go into these areas. And cops are now afraid to police in low-income neighborhoods because in order to do their job, they put themselves in unnecessary danger and also might be, later on, asked to justify their actions in court. And, of course, they don't want to do that. So some more statistics on African American neighborhoods. What's going on is in these neighborhoods, crime is extremely high, and cops do not want to police there. When they do go into these neighborhoods, they go in with a different mentality, a different attitude than they should. And then on the other side, the community members see themselves on the receiving end of aggressive police powers that sometimes involve stop and frisk and civil asset forfeiture, which violate their civil. So let's examine some of the reasons that this might be the case. What I mentioned earlier is that blacks committed a great deal of the crimes in America. However, blacks are twice as nearly to live in poverty as whites, and this is because of a couple of things. And the reasons are it's difficult to infer causation, and so I don't really want to be presumptuous in doing so because I take academic credibility very seriously, but poverty causes crime. There is a direct correlation between those two, and blacks are poor in part because of the Great Migration up to cities like Detroit, Michigan, Chicago, Illinois, back in the 1960s, 1970s, and the subsequent white flight of suburban whites leaving for whatever reason, for a number of reasons. Can't say one individual thing was responsible for that, but they all left, and then tax revenues fell, and then industry left, and then suddenly you have blacks in urban centers, and you have a bad situation. You don't have economic opportunity, you don't have business capital, you have welfare, you have everything you need to begin cyclical poverty. So then, on top of all of this, the first theory we're going to talk about is basically the theory of drug crime enforcement that began alongside broken windows theory of policing. And this theory involves the idea that if you stop petty crime, you're going to see a trickle up response in larger crime. If you want to stop sex trafficking, prostitution, homicide, robbery, you've got to stop the small crime. The only problem with this is that this sort of police theory has not worked. Some police officers maintain that it's worked, but come on. What we're actually seeing is a large spike in the amount of people in jail for petty crimes whose futures then end up being ruined. Non-violent crimes, and then they end up in prison, unable to get jobs after their release because of the mandatory minimums that made their charges felonies, just for selling a bag of a plant they grew in their house. That'll make the customer laugh, giggle, and eat a lot. Maybe make bad puns. Broken windows policing has failed. It has failed entirely, and broken windows policing has plagued African American and Hispanic neighborhoods more than any other neighborhoods, because those inner city neighborhoods are ones that see these um, that see these petty crimes as just part of life. So inferring causation again is difficult because it becomes cyclical. It becomes police response, it becomes petty crime response, anti-authoritarianism, and it goes back and forth and back and forth. And that is what is happening in the United States right now. The war on drugs has been the biggest failure that we've seen from broken windows policing. Here's some statistics I grabbed. The U.S. has 5% of the world's population, but 25% of its prisoners. Um, Drugs, for a number of reasons, one which being low prospects for life. Um, African Americans use drugs oftentimes in urban neighborhoods, even though there are 5 times as many whites using drugs. Um, black people just happen to be the ones that are arrested for whatever reason. Um, I have also learned that aggressive policing is ultimately a perverse incentive, because the more arrests these officers make, the more it looks like they're doing their jobs. So they go into these urban neighborhoods and they make tons and tons of arrests. Well, it looks on paper like they're mega cops, but in reality they're just turning in people selling dope, not real criminals, which they're not. You know, these crimes don't hurt anyone. They aren't causing damage to society. Heroin use, okay, maybe if you're selling a drug or meth, maybe you're selling a drug is going to kill someone, then that's one thing. But pot? Or even crack cocaine? Come on. And African Americans represent 12% of the total population of drug users, but 38% of those arrested for drug offenses. And 59% of those in state prisons for drug offense, because of the reasons I just mentioned. So another slide, just throwing out some more statistics about this exact thing. 1 million of the 2.3 million incarcerated Americans are black, even though they're only 12% of the population. Not a lot. They're also serving a lot more time in prison, in part because of mandatory minimums. So then we get to the second theory that I want to talk about, which is conflict theory. So conflict theory, it asserts, according to Benjamin L. Snyder of Washington State University, who wrote an awesome paper on conflict theory in policing that I'm going to use in my sources. Conflict theory asserts that particular segments of society benefit disproportionately from established social and economic arrangements, which leads them to employ the state's coercive force in maintaining that inequality. So this you have the higher beating down on the lower. You have the people at the back of the train being oppressed by the people at the front of the train. Hoping that I'll get brownie points for mentioning Snowpiercer, great movie. Anyway, you have power that necessitates the oppression of lower classes to maintain inequality. This is simply a theory that can explain why this force exists. At maybe a subconscious level. I hate inferring causality and saying that this is institutionalized. It looks like it is, but the reasons for that you can't simply reduce to something simple. There are a number of them. But conflict theory does play a part, perhaps, in police psychology and how they approach urban neighborhoods. So, finally, we get to the solutions, what the possible solutions are to this issue. And it's a mess. It really is a mess. Because we are in a lot of danger of pushing the pendulum back the opposite direction. We can't let the pendulum swing here. We have to let cops do their jobs. The police keep us safe. The police are not perfect, but the police are... They have kept order in America for the entire duration of our country's existence. Again, haven't always been the most positive force that we've needed, but they're there when we need them. If someone's breaking into our house, we call the police. We we need the police to keep us safe. It's just the reality of things. And in many places in the United States, the police are there to help us. It's where they aren't that's the problem. Um, Voices like Black Lives Matter, I'm highly critical of, and you guys should be too. You have to be extremely critical of an organization that wants to undermine the very essence of that authority. Because then you have radicals who go out and pop bullets at a cop that has gone out of his way to serve his community for the entirety of his career. And then you have a bad situation. Then you have increased dissension. You have increased distrust between the populace, and law enforcement. And these are things that are not going to stand long term. So here's some, going back to the premise, went off a tangent there. Here are some of our solutions. One has been body cameras. This is a little bit problematic in that it can be inefficient to maintain as a standard. They don't always have their body cameras on. Even when footage is collected, it can sometimes still be one sided and not portray the entirety of the situation. But it can at least give us a glimpse into what the officer's actually doing, and it's better than nothing. It's better than his word against mine. It's better than we have a body of an unarmed person shot dead by the cops. We have no clue what happened because that dead person can't, dead man tell no tales. So what do what do you do about police cameras? Well, we should have them, and that's something that is being implemented right now in some police precincts across the country. Another solution is one that I have had the blessing of encountering. It's called verbal judo. And we actually at the school had we had a retired police officer come in for a seminar and give us a lecture on basic verbal judo, which involves de-escalating conflict. And that is the biggest issue, I think, with law enforcement, is that many of them are not bad people. They just want to do, their duty. We want to fulfill the expectations that their job entails, but they do not have the skills for dealing with conflict. They tense up, their blood pressure rises, they're more prone to irrational thinking and impulsive decision making, more so than they would be otherwise. So yeah, one of these solutions is to simply teach police officers how to de-escalate conflict, how to generate voluntary compliance without having to pull out a gun. It saves them lots of complaints. It saves money wasted in lawsuits. It can potentially save lives. When you can use your words to de-escalate a situation, you are ultimately at the advantage for handling that situation. Ultimately, you come out on top. These are the best solutions I've thought of. Many say that solutions also involve not being racist or telling cops not to shoot people. Well, I think I've argued that the situation is a lot more complicated than simply aggressive, loose cannon cops who are trigger happy. It involves deep-rooted psychological tendencies. It involves presumptions. It involves paranoia. It involves a lot of human propensities for thoughts and mindsets that lead to violence that transcend simple desire to shoot people. Because really, no cop goes out to work in the morning, puts on his vest, straps up, his belt, holsters his gun, and says, "I'm going to go shoot someone today. I'm feeling the need to pop some rounds in someone." That's not how it works. They go home saying, "I will do everything it takes to get back to this house at the end of the day." And so whatever we can do, whatever can be done at an institutional level, whatever can be done at a level of local law enforcement to assure that both civilians and police feel safe, to reduce homicides, I'm an advocate of. So thank you everyone for listening. Sorry if this was a spiel, if I related information in a way that was indirect, circumventing the main points. But I'm gonna wrap it up right here and say I hope you learned something. I hope I've given you, something to look into for your future research. Thank you.